And when we criticize people using terms like threat, we must stop him, but they're getting so creative in their ways to say things that make it even worse when you hear what Gina Raimondo, Secretary of Commerce, said on Morning Joe this morning. This is after we know that there is a current specific threat against the president from Iran. Let's go ahead and play bite one.
What he says is the opposite. It's just another lie. Like, how did we get here? Let's extinguish him for good. We have an answer. We have a remarkably talented candidate who is sincere, who's pragmatic, who's open. Let's just get it done.
Extinguish him for good.
And it is with this understanding, this vision, to see what can be unburdened by what has been.
I can imagine what can be and be unburdened by what has been, you know? What can be unburdened by what has been.
There are those who are unable to see what can be, but there are many more who are able to see what can be unburdened by what has been.
The point about progress is to have the ability to have a vision and a belief and some faith in what can be unburdened by what has been.
Can you please try and explain to me what you interpret by what can be unburdened by what has been? What does that mean?
I don't know if I should say. There's a line in Marx where sometimes you hear certain phrases like a world to win. AOC uses the phrase, we have a world to win, which comes from the end of the Communist Manifesto, originally written in German. It was the name. I used to hang out in the Revolutionary Bookstore in Cambridge, Massachusetts with the communists because they print everything in every language. So if you're trying to learn multiple languages, they'll print the same text in all of these languages and you can compare. It basically says you have to wipe out what has been to arrive in the new.
And where's it from? What can be unburdened by what has been?
It's not a direct translation, but it occurs in Karl Marx. Now, I wasn't expecting this. I could find you the exact reference. If you think about what Mao had to do to wipe out Chinese history, what Pol Pot had to do, you're trying to wipe out memory because the memory has all of this burden. Why is it important to go after doctors and lawyers and teachers and professors? Because in some sense, they are going to resist the new order that you're about to impose. You're looking for a blank slate.
So like a tether to the past.
Okay, I'm going to tell a story I don't know that I've ever told anyone. Maybe I have, maybe I haven't. Can't promise it's original to you. But I was in Hoi An in Vietnam. Now, I'm going to lose this one. Hoi An is one of the only beautiful places that I found, you know, like Hue and Hoi An. A lot of things were really ripped up in that war. And there is an unbelievable and difficult instrument, which the Vietnamese language is very hard, so I'm going to say it wrong, it would be written as Dan Bao. It's one string and a giant lever, and you pluck the harmonics, And it's supposed to be an intimate instrument, I think sometimes played by the blind, where only the person who's intended is the recipient of the music. Okay. I see this in a window in Hoi An, and I become transfixed by it. And a woman says, I see you looking at this in English. Would you like to come in? And I said, I don't want to impose. She says, no, it's not mine. So she invites me in. And there's this guy who appears to be brain dead. He's like deformed. I'm not going to get through this. And he's speaking very haltingly, and I don't know who he is. And there's something about music, something about journalism, something about a professional. I can't really make out what's happening. I'm asking about the instrument. And this woman brings him a guitar. And this deformed man starts playing some transcript, like Chopin or some piano concerto on the guitar at some incredible level. And I can't even imagine that his body can do it. And so I have no idea where I am or what's happening. And then he motions for like a book. And she brings a book. And it has all of these articles about this man tortured for his principled stand against communism. This man has been destroyed, mind, body, to the point where it's just painful to watch him. And I realized that basically do you know what a nail house is? If you Google nail house under Google Images, do it. Or you can't do it, or you're off the internet.
No, I can do it.
Tell me what you see.
It's a tall building, an individual standalone structure in the middle of a road.
There are these people who will not give up their homes when a shopping mall goes in or a road is put. And for some reason, they'll build a highway to screw over the person who stands up and says, I will not move. And the idea is that that road is the future, unburdened by what has been, and then there's some holdout who won't go along with the program.
If Kamala Harris is as unsophisticated as we think she is, do we really believe that she is quoting from the dark depths of...
Why do you believe she is as unsophisticated as you have just claimed? What did her father do? And by the way, I am assuming that I will end up on the Open Skies watch list as a result of this podcast.
That is crazy, by the way, what happened to Tulsi. The quad S on her boarding pass. Donald J. Harris, the father of Kamala Harris, Jamaican-American economist, professor emeritus at Stanford University.
Tulsi, I want to go directly to you. You know that you were on, you're kind of thinking back, and you're like, okay, I know I did a Fox News interview on July 23rd, and the next time I took a flight was a couple days later, and I had that Quad S designation, which randomly sometimes is put on any of our tickets. And if it's random once in a while, that's no big deal. That was supposed to be how it worked. But then you noticed it kept happening and happening and happening. And so you realize this is something bigger. And then we've had whistleblowers come out saying that you've been put on, the Quiet Skies list. And let me just read that out for people, what the purpose of that list is for: to mitigate the threat to commercial aviation posed by unknown or partially known terrorists. So, I mean, Tulsi, just your reaction when you found out that you were on that list. You are someone who has served the country both in Congress, as a presidential candidate, and currently in our armed forces.
The closest word that I could think of that can begin to describe what I felt and what I feel in learning that actually, according to these whistleblowers, that I am on this Quiet Skies list, that my own government, my president, my commander-in-chief is targeting me as a potential domestic terrorist. The closest word that comes to mind is a complete sense of betrayal. And it's betrayal because I, like so many Americans, enlisted because of the Islamist terrorist attacks on 9/11, enlisted to serve in our country's military, to ensure the safety, security, and freedom of the American people, to go after and defeat and destroy those Islamist terrorists who continue to pose the greatest short and long-term threat to us, to our security, and to our freedom. And so now, after serving over 21 years and continuing to serve in our nation's military, my own government has labeled and is targeting me directly now as a domestic terrorist, as they are many others. I'm not alone in this. Of course, this list is not being made public, but we can look to what the Biden-Harris administration has done in multiple cases of how they have there have been leaked conversations, leaked files, leaked documents, and even statements they've made in public saying that this threat of domestic terrorism and extremism is so great, and often very likely it is those in the military or military veterans who are these potential threats here at home. It is more than a slap in the face. It's more than a punch in the gut. It is a complete betrayal coming from our own government, that they are using our taxpayer dollars, our resources. They are using people like the air marshals as weapons and pawns to target their political opponents. And that's really what this is all about.
With breaking news just coming in, the indictment against New York City Mayor Eric Adams has just been unsealed. Let's get right to News 4 Chief Investigative Reporter Jonathan Deans with what the indictment and the charges are against the New York City mayor. John.
Yeah, hi, Adam. The charges just unsealed. The indictment sent to us. Here are some of the charges. Count 1, conspiracy to commit wire fraud and receive campaign contributions from foreign nationals. Another count, count 2, wire fraud. Count 3 against the mayor, solicitation of a contribution by a foreign national. That is count 3. Count 4, a similar count of that. Count 5 charges Mayor Adams with bribery. Let me just see if there is a 6th count, if you forgive me as I go through these pages here, as it is a 58-page document that we're going through. So it is a 5-count indictment, wire fraud, solicitation of campaign contributions by foreign nationals, and bribery.
And by the way, I am assuming that I will end up on the Open Skies watch list as a result of this podcast.
That is crazy, by the way, what happened to Tulsi. The quad S on her boarding pass. Donald J. Harris, the father of Kamala Harris, Jamaican-American economist, professor emeritus at Stanford University, originally from St. Ann's Bay, Jamaica.
What kind of economics?
Known for applying post-Keynesian ideas to development economics. What's post-Keynesian?
I don't know.
Post-Keynesian economics is a school of economic thought with its origins in the general theory of John Maynard Keynes' subsequent development influenced to a large degree by a name I can't pronounce.
I think that there was a lot of Marxist thought. And as a man whose family comes from the far left, you recognize certain sorts of commonalities. I'm sure she would see them in me. The Democratic Party is not communist. I don't think that that's right. That's the critique of many of my right-wing friends. But it is welcomed in a lot of neo-Marxian thought. I would say AOC is straight up Marxist. I don't know. I think Kamala is everywhere between crony finance and Marxism. You're talking about things for which you do not have language.
Chairman Comer, thank you for being here today. Ranking Member Raskin, it really is an honor to be with all of y'all and fellow members of the committee. I have a prepared opening statement that I'll get into in just a second, but Ranking Member Raskin, you reiterated and have created a boogeyman that just isn't there. I did author the EPA chapter on Project 2025, but in the course of that, I did not work with President Trump, with any of the people who work for him directly or his campaign. And it is very misleading to suggest that there's any coordination there, because I can personally tell you it did not happen. And I am not vying for a position in the next administration. I've actually left D.C. and I've moved to a small town in Mississippi where I interact every day with people who live outside this bubble of gaslighting and misleading. And they actually are dealing with the consequences caused by policy decisions of this administration that isn't defined by progress, but defined by creating unnecessary hardship. I understand why it's hard to think about the political realm prior to President Trump, but the Heritage Foundation has been very involved in pushing forward conservative policies for quite a while. And the Mandate for Leadership, the latest iteration, it's the 9th edition. This is a project that has been put out every few years since 1981. So it's been around for quite some time, and again, is more committed to representing the position of the broader conservative movement than any one candidate or person. And I understand why there is the creation of this boogeyman, because your leading candidate is one running away from policy actions she has taken that make Americans' lives much more difficult. In fact, Vice President Kamala Harris was recently asked on national television the following question: when it comes to the economy, do you believe Americans are better off than they were 4 years ago? She said a lot of words, but she did not answer the question, because the reality is most Americans are not better off. Most Americans are struggling to deal with expensive gas, expensive electricity, and high-cost goods and groceries that have created financial burdens that Americans have had to deal with throughout the Biden-Harris administration. Their day one energy policies are a key driver behind Americans' increasing financial distress. From President Biden's promise to end all fossil fuels, alongside Vice President Kamala Harris's commitment to ban fracking, Americans have suffered under their radical agenda. From the energy perspective, this has included locking up development of resources and demonizing industries, mainly coal, oil, and natural gas, that still provide 80% of our daily energy needs. A recent report from the Institute of Energy Research has been tracking these actions, and they've found that since January 2021, President Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, and congressional Democrats have taken over 250 actions that make it harder to produce energy in America. This has included stopping construction of the Keystone XL pipeline that immediately cut 11,000 domestic jobs, including thousands of union jobs, issuing a moratorium on new oil and gas permits on federal lands, greenlighting Putin's Nord Stream 2 pipeline while shuttering the development of U.S. pipelines along the East Coast, rejoining the disastrous Paris Climate Agreement that is squeezing out U.S. jobs and increasing the regulatory burden on American companies, launching a war on household appliances that are now 34% more expensive than 15 years ago, blocking the Twin Metals mine, shuttering U.S. steelworker jobs in Minnesota and cutting off access to critical minerals that we need more and more of. And instead, this administration is making us more and more dependent on China. Slowing permits for LNG facilities from an average of 7 weeks to 11 months, then completely halting permits for new LNG facilities altogether. Mandating that Americans drive electric vehicles despite growing market resistance, infrastructure shortfalls, and a preference for more affordable and reliable gas-powered vehicles. Americans are dealing with the consequences of these actions every time they put gas in their car, pay their electricity bills, or go to the grocery store. Now, this isn't necessary for purposes of protecting the environment or saving future generations from climate change. I know this because during the Trump administration, we were able to grow the economy, create jobs, reduce emissions, and address legacy environmental issues. The reality is that America needs more energy, and with the right policies in place and a pragmatic mindset from our leaders, we can build a strong economy that delivers lower cost for consumers, protects the environment, and reverses the negative financial consequences of the past 3.5 years. Again, thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
I wanted to give credit for where I got this information from, but when I went back to the site, it said this page could not be found. Thank God I was able to grab this information. What can be unburdened by what has been? I've heard this slogan before, but not quite put that way. And it is a Marxist slogan. It says Kamala Harris's words, what can be unburdened by what has been, carry with them the echoes of a revolutionary manifesto. The words are not merely a reflection of hope or optimism, but a deliberate invocation of future untethered by the constraints of the past. To truly understand the weight of this statement, one must evolve into ideology roots from which it springs, the lineage steep in the teachings of Marxism passed down through generations. What that gentleman was saying earlier about Pak, about Mao, Stalin, Lenin, when it comes to Marxism, what can be unburdened by what has been means to get rid of our past. Tear down statues of founding fathers, get rid of the Constitution. We see attacks on the Constitution all the time, changing the names of schools from past presidents to whatever the hell they want to call them now. That's exactly what is going on in this country. It is a Marxist takeover by the Democratic Party. People have been warning others about this for the longest time. This progression from where we are now really started from when Obama was in office. But if you bring it up, people go, oh man, that's just racist, or they don't want to believe it because Obama is their messiah. Obama was raised by Marxists. He has Marxist ideology. His staff were Marxist people. Valerie Jarrett was a Marxist. John Brennan, a person that was in control of all of our intelligence agencies, was a registered communist. How do these people get the security clearance to be where they are? We know that Kamala Harris is a Marxist. We know that AOC is a Marxist. We know that many members of the squad are Marxists. And in case you forgot,
I think that the criticism is helpful. I also think that it might, I think of a lot of things. The first thing I think is that we actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists.
So this whole BLM movement was more of a Marxist movement, but you can't tell people that. They were there to push a Marxist agenda, and it spread through all the universities and college. And you can see here now, you have Kamala Harris. So it was one thing to have Obama in office with his Marxist approach, but now you have Kamala Harris, who's a lot more radical than Obama, believe it or not. She's not being shy about it, nor is AOC. You heard that gentleman say that AOC's slogan, "Win the World," is a Marxist slogan. So Kamala Harris is pushing forward a Marxist agenda. You heard that redheaded lady there in the, I can't pronounce her name neither, but during the hearing, saying how the Biden-Harris administration was collecting a lot of the American resources. A lot of those resources end up being sold to China, of all damn things. But they control the media, so it's really hard for real news to get out. So Harris, without a doubt, is like her father. They're Marxists. Says Kamala Harris was raised in a household influenced by her father, a Marxist professor, where the principles of communism were not just theoretical constructs, but lived beliefs. Her statement, when examined through the lens of a Marxist theory, is a call to arms for a new reality, one that seeks to fundamentally dismantle the existing structure that have long governed American society. And we know that to be true. Like I said, when we had the Summer of Love and the BLM movement, they were tearing down our statues, burning our flags, changing names of schools, claiming they don't want them there because these people were slave owners. Whatever excuse it took to tear down the statues. But what they were trying to do was erase our past. Any kind of link between our past and where they want to be, they want it destroyed. And that's why you see these people open up re-education camps, some death camps, labor camps, whatever, to those individuals who refuse to conform. What can be is more than just a speculative idea. It is a Marxist vision of a future where the contradictions of capitalism give rise to pure communist society. The vision is not new, but rather a continuation of revolutionary aspirations that have sought to overturn what they see as the oppressive system of the past. Now, I've played this video before. How many of you guys remember G. Edward Griffin's speech about communism? Listen to it and tell me if it sounds familiar to you.
Now, here is a book that I think ought to be in every home library. It's entitled Color, Communism, and Common Sense by Manning Johnson. Manning Johnson was a Negro, and he was also a member of the Communist Party. He joined the party as a young man because he honestly believed that the communists were trying to improve the conditions of his people. He was a dedicated communist. But after many years, Manning Johnson finally came to the realization that the communists weren't the least bit interested in improving the conditions of the Negro people. He discovered that instead they were merely planning to use his people, and these are his words, to use them as cannon fodder in a bloody revolution to destroy America. As early as 1928, the communists declared that the racial differences among our people constituted the weakest and most vulnerable point in our social fabric. By constantly probing and straining at this one spot, they calculated that eventually the cloth could be torn apart and that Americans could be divided, weakened, and perhaps even set against each other in open combat. We must not be led into placing the blame for the riots, the civil disorders, on the Negro people of our nation. Even those few who are promoting hatred and violence in the black communities are not themselves the cause. They're merely being used by forces far bigger than they are to promote the violent phase of the revolution in America. Hoping to avoid further violence and bloodshed, the public is to be pressured into accepting measures that will move the country gradually and legally toward communism, but without calling it that. The strategy of the proletarian revolution calls for the quiet conversion of our government into a communist regime, but under the banner of socialism. The new program of the Communist Party on this subject has this to say. The term socialism describes but the first stage of a new society that in its full development is called communism. Socialism is a transitional stage. The building of socialism is the communist revolution in America. It represents the process whereby our country can be moved gradually toward communism without the people even being aware of it. They have one and only one solution for all problems: more government, and then more and more until it's total government. Total government is communism. We must not be fooled into thinking that the causes of our civil turmoil are such things as poverty, poor housing, lack of education, and similar social or economic factors. As a matter of fact, most of today's self-styled revolutionaries, black and white, come from good homes, could earn better than average incomes if they wanted to work. And in fact, they're products of some of the finest institutions of higher learning. We mustn't resort to violence either as a means of furthering political or social goals. And we must do everything humanly possible to discourage others from doing so. We must support our local police. Nothing can be quite so damaging to police morale and efficiency as converting every arrest into a trial of the policeman instead of the criminal. Now, in passing, ladies and gentlemen, you may have wondered why the Communist Party has been a staunch supporter of the drive to place a black studies curriculum into our high schools and colleges. Well, the reason becomes obvious the minute you take a look at the textbooks and the study guides. Under the guise of academic balance, these courses have become a brilliant device for conditioning young people to accept still one more part of the total program for revolution. We must discover the identity of those individuals, both above and below, who consciously are furthering the communist program for revolution, and then remove them from their positions of trust and leadership. Now, of course, the minute you begin to think along these lines, you'll become the target of a whole barrage of attacks. You'll be called a right-wing extremist, a fascist, or at least a dictator. Some years ago, I happened to attend a meeting where several anti-communist refugees from behind the Iron Curtain were called upon to relate their personal experiences. One of the refugees spoke up and he said, "You know, I came to America expecting to find a nation of free men. But instead, I find exactly the same thing. Everywhere I look, I see men and women who know that communists are making headway in this country. They know that something must be done and that someone must stand up to them. But they themselves do nothing. They remain silent because they're afraid that if they speak out or take a stand publicly, it'll be bad for business. They may lose a client. They may even lose their jobs. If communism should ever come to America, we'll face more death, destruction, and human suffering than any people in history has ever faced at the hands of their invading conquerors. It's literally a question of life and death for all of us. And it's about time the American people began to face up to that fact and to act accordingly. Thank you.
This is a speech on April 3rd, 1969. Does it sound familiar, what he's talking about? Is that where we are today? So a communist takeover, they must erase the history of a country's past in order for them to move forward. That's why they want to do away with the Constitution. You hear the Democrats talk about it, saying it's an old document, it doesn't do any good, it's outdated. They do this all the time. They attacked the First Amendment by having the Biden administration created a mis- and disinformation board behind the public's back, and people actually supported this. It made me sick. The Second Amendment, they want to take away your weapons. The Fourth Amendment against illegal search and seizures, we see that happening all the time. So they absolutely are not only screwing with our Constitution, but our Bill of Rights, and people are allowing it. You also heard that one lady saying that they need to exterminate Donald Trump. These are the types of words being used by communist people. Unburdened by what has been is a phrase that encapsulates the very essence of Marxist historical materialism. It speaks to the necessity of shedding the ideological, economic, and social shackles that have been inherited from previous societies. In the Marxist framework, history is a series of struggles, and each epoch demands the overthrow of the old order to pave way for a new society. Then Kamala Harris' words then are a modern reiteration of this timeline, calls for revolutionary praxis. The translation of these phrases into the language of political action is clear. What can be envisions a communist nation, one where the exploitative mechanisms of capitalism have been abolished, and people are free to live in an emancipated collective society, unburdened by what has been, demands the dismantling of the past, destroying the exploitative relations of production and the economic and social structures that they feel have long dominated capitalist society. This is no small task. It is, in essence, a blueprint for a Marxist revolution that seeks to fundamentally change America from its very foundation. Barack Obama, in his 2008 presidential campaign, famously spoke of a fundamentally changed in America. I told you this guy was a Marxist and he was bad news. This statement made in his speech just days before the election became a lightning rod for both his supporters and critics. It was a promise of sweeping change, a commitment to a vision of America that would be reshaped in profound ways. 16 years later, his agenda is still being implemented. Recently, Kamala Harris's campaign has shifted from the theme of saving democracy, a theme handed down by Joe Biden, to a more nebulous and potentially radical theme of a campaign of joy. The term a campaign of joy might seem innocuous, even uplifting at first glance, but the historical parallels it draws are unsettling. The phrase calls to the mind of strength through joy campaign of the Nazi Germany, known as the KDF, which is established in 1933. Talking about this right here. This campaign was a critical tool of the Nazi propaganda designed to project an image of a government that cared deeply for its citizens' well-being while simultaneously controlling their lives in every conceivable way. The comparison may be jarring, but it serves as a stark reminder of how powerful and dangerous rhetoric can be when wielded by those seeking to reshape society on a grand scale. Kamala Harris' words, what can be, unburdened by what has been, are not just a casual reflection on the possibilities of the future. They are a calculated and ideological change declaration of intent. Her proposal to ban price gouging in groceries and food And the imposition of large fines on businesses is a form of government overreach. And the other thing is, she keeps saying price gouging, but when you ask her who it is that's price gouging, there is nobody. As a matter of fact, economists came out and said there's nobody out there who's price gouging. This is just an excuse she was using to explain why we're paying so much in groceries instead of saying it's inflation. Traditional capitalism operates on the principle that prices are set by the market, with supply and demand dictating cost. In contrast, Marxist theory often advocates for state control or heavy regulations on markets, and which political party keeps drowned in the United States in regulations? That would be the Democrats. And who was getting rid of these regulations when he was in office? Trump. Then there's a redistribution of wealth. The $25,000 subsidiary for the first-time home buyers included for non-U.S. citizens and the expanded child tax credits are perfect examples of wealth distribution, a concept central to the Marxist ideology. By the way, these policies involve using taxpayer money, often derived from higher earners and corporations, to provide financial benefits to others. Then there's her elimination of medical debt policy. Her plan to cancel medical debt represents a significant government intervention in personal finances, which aligns perfectly with these socialist principles. Government intervention with medical debt is creating a precedent for the government to assume responsibility for personal finance mismanagement. Let's not forget the centralized control over industry she's trying for. Both Biden and Kamala share the proposal to expand federal involvement in the pharmaceutical industry, including price controls on prescription drugs. It's just another policy that has Marxist principles. In traditional capitalism, industries are privately controlled with minimal government interference. Marxism, on the other hand, often advocates for the state to control key industries. She's also using class-based economic policies. Kamala emphasizes on building up the middle class and targeting wealthier individuals and corporations for higher taxes is most certainly a Marxist idea. Marxist is rooted in the idea of class conflict, where the working class must be empowered against the capitalist class. She is ultimately offering an expansion of the welfare state. Kamala's proposal expansions of the child tax credit, housing subsidies, and healthcare support align with the inevitable expansion of the welfare state, which is a key component of socialist and Marxist ideology. Kamala's policies put the emphasis on government intervention, wealth redistribution, and expanded welfare. That's Marxist policies, period. Instead, she should be prioritizing market freedom, limiting government, and allowing for individual responsibility. It is a continuation of the agenda of the 2008 Fundamentally Changing America put forward by Obama. He didn't do this by accident, say Obama's policy, because Obama is controlling the Biden administration and would control Kamala Harris's administration.
What you know now, do you wish like you had a third term? And I used to say, you know what, if I could make an arrangement where I had a stand-in, a front man or front woman, and they had an earpiece in, and I was just in my basement in my sweats, looking through the stuff, and then I could sort of deliver the lines, but somebody else was doing all the talking and ceremony.
Wow. The very dangerous Marxist manifesto. What can be unburdened by what has been and fundamentally change America. So when people keep saying that Obama is a communist, his staff are all communists, Kamala is a communist, why do you think Trump calls Kamala Comrade Kamala Harris? Because she's pushing a Marxist ideology, and they're using our youth to help push that forward. E.G. Edwards told you in 1969, you better be careful, because they'll use racism as a way to implement their policies. And that's exactly what we're seeing happening here. Let me know what you think. I look forward to hearing from you. I'm out.